The Panther's 75mm shell punched through 3 Sherman tanks in a single shot, killing 15 American boys before they even knew death was coming. It was July 1944, somewhere in the hedgerows of Normandy, and Lieutenant James Morrison watched his entire platoon disappear in flames within 45 seconds. The German Panther had fired from nearly 1,800 yards away, a distance where American tankers couldn't even dream of returning fire effectively. Morrison survived only because his Sherman had stalled behind a stone wall, hidden from the German gunner's sight by pure accident. This wasn't war. This was a massacre. The Panther tank had become the nightmare that haunted every American armored unit in Europe. Weighing 45 tons and armed with the legendary 75mm KWK-42 gun, it could penetrate the frontal armor of a Sherman at ranges that seemed impossible. Meanwhile, the Sherman's 75mm gun bounced harmlessly off the Panther's sloped armor like pebbles against a castle wall. American tank crews had taken to calling themselves Ronson Lighters after the cigarette lighter company's slogan, "Lights up the first time, every time." The mathematical reality was brutal and simple. In a head-to-head encounter, a Panther could destroy a Sherman before the American tank could get close enough to fire back. Allied intelligence estimated that it took 5 Shermans to destroy a single Panther, and 4 of those 5 Shermans wouldn't be going home. For the young men climbing into American tanks each morning, these weren't statistics. They were death sentences. By August 1944, the problem had reached crisis levels. General Omar Bradley's staff officers delivered grim reports daily. Tank battalions were being decimated. Morale was collapsing. Crews were refusing to advance when Panthers were reported ahead. Some commanders were quietly suggesting that American armor doctrine had failed catastrophically. The Germans had built a better tank, and American industry's quantity over quality approach was filling French fields with burning metal coffins. The Sherman tank, despite its reliability and ease of production, was simply outclassed. Its designers had never anticipated facing something like the Panther. When American engineers had drawn up the Sherman specifications in 1940 and 1941, the most formidable opponent they'd envisioned was the German Panzer III or a Vorfer. Nobody had predicted that German engineering would leap forward so dramatically. Nobody had imagined sloped armor this effective, guns this powerful, or armor this thick on a medium tank chassis. Captain Robert Hayes of the 2nd Armored Division wrote home in late July, "We're fighting with pea shooters against sledgehammers. Yesterday we lost 6 tanks trying to knock out 2 Panthers. The boys are scared, and I can't blame them. I'm scared too. We need something that can reach out and touch these German monsters before they turn us into scrap metal." The U.S. Army wasn't sitting idle. Since North Africa, American military doctrine had emphasized a different approach to defeating enemy armor. Instead of building heavy tanks to fight other tanks, which would be slow and difficult to transport, the Americans developed specialized vehicles called tank destroyers. These machines sacrificed armor protection for speed and hitting power. The theory was elegant. Don't try to out-armor the enemy, outmaneuver them, and kill them from positions they couldn't reach. But theory and practice were proving to be very different things. The early tank destroyers, like the M10 Wolverine, had shown promise against earlier German tanks, but even they struggled against the Panther's thick armor and long-range capability. The M10's 76mm gun was powerful, but its slow speed meant it often couldn't get into advantageous positions before German tanks spotted and destroyed it. Something faster was needed, something deadlier, something that could engage Panthers at the extreme ranges where German crews felt invincible. That something was already crossing the Atlantic Ocean in late summer 1944, loaded onto transport ships and destined for the battlefields of France. The tank destroyer crews didn't know it yet, but they were about to receive a weapon that would fundamentally change the mathematics of armored warfare on the Western Front. The M18 Hellcat was coming to Europe, and the Germans were about to learn a terrible lesson about American innovation. In late August, the first M18 battalions began arriving at supply depots behind the front lines. Most tankers had never seen anything like it. Where the Sherman was stolid and box-like, the M18 was sleek and predatory. Its low profile and open-top turret gave it an almost skeletal appearance. But what really caught everyone's attention was the speed. During demonstration runs, the Hellcat hit speeds of 55 miles per hour on open ground, making it the fastest tracked armored vehicle in the world. Sergeant William Fletcher, a veteran of the North Africa campaign, remembered his first sight of the M18. "We thought someone was playing a joke on us. This thing looked like it was made of paper. No roof on the turret, armor so thin you could probably punch through it if you hit it hard enough. But then they told us what it could do and everything changed. This wasn't about trading punches with Panthers. This was about shooting them before they knew we were there, then disappearing like ghosts." The M18 carried the same 76mm gun as the late-model Shermans and the M10, but in a package that weighed less than 20 tons. This lightweight, combined with a powerful engine, gave it acceleration and speed that no German tank could match. More importantly, tank destroyer doctrine emphasized using terrain, concealment, and superior optics to engage enemy armor at maximum range. The crews selected for the M18 battalions underwent intensive training. They learned to read terrain like a language, identifying firing positions with long sight lines and multiple escape routes. They practiced rapid fire and immediate displacement. They memorized the weak points on every German tank and self-propelled gun. Most critically, they trained endlessly on long-range gunnery, firing at targets 2,000 yards away and beyond. By September 1944, several M18 battalions had completed their training and were moving up to the front lines. They were heading toward the Lorraine region of eastern France, where American forces were preparing for a major push toward the German border. Intelligence reports indicated heavy German armored concentrations in the area, including numerous Panther tanks from elite panzer brigades. The stage was set for a confrontation that would shock the German high command and prove that American doctrine, when properly executed, could defeat superior German engineering. The young men in the Hellcat battalions didn't know they were about to make history. They only knew they finally had a weapon that gave them a fighting chance against the Panthers that had been killing their friends for months. The Battle of Aricourt was about to begin, and nothing in armored warfare would ever be quite the same again. September 12, 1944. The village of Aricourt, France, sat quietly in the early morning fog, unaware it was about to become the proving ground for a revolution in armored warfare. The 704th Tank Destroyer Battalion rolled into their assembly area just before dawn. Their M18 Hellcats moved with an almost unnatural quietness for tracked vehicles, their crews alert and tense. They'd been in Europe for less than 2 weeks, and this would be their first real combat operation. For months they'd trained in the United States, firing thousands of practice rounds, learning to think like hunters rather than brawlers. Now it was time to discover if all that training meant anything against the best tanks Germany could field. Staff Sergeant Thomas Conroy climbed down from his Hellcat, stretching muscles stiff from the overnight road march. At 23 years old, he was already a veteran by most standards, having survived the fighting in Italy before volunteering for tank destroyer training. But nothing in Italy had prepared him for what he'd heard about the Panthers. The stories from Normandy had filtered through the ranks like poison, eating away at confidence. Crews burning alive. Entire platoons wiped out in minutes. German tanks killing from distances that seemed impossible. His gunner, Corporal Eddie Martinez from Texas, was already checking the 76mm gun for the third time that morning. Martinez was obsessive about his weapon, treating it with the kind of reverence most men reserved for religious artifacts. Good, Conroy thought. They'd need that kind of precision today. The battalion commander, Lieutenant Colonel Abrams, gathered his officers and senior NCOs for a final briefing. A tall man with hard eyes and a reputation for aggressive tactics, Abrams spread a map across the hood of a jeep and pointed to a series of ridgelines east of Aricourt. "Intelligence reports German armor concentrations here, here, and here," he said, tapping the map. "At least 2 panzer brigades, probably more. Panthers, Panzerfours, and supporting infantry. They're preparing for a counterattack against Martin's Corps. Our job is simple. We find them, we kill them, and we don't let them organize their attack." Captain Richard Walsh, commanding C Company, studied the terrain features. "Sir, those ridgelines offer excellent fields of fire. If we can get hull-down positions up there before the Germans move, we'll have visibility out to 3,000 yards. Abrams nodded. "That's exactly what we're going to do. The Germans think they own the battlefield at range. They think their Panthers can sit back and pick us apart like they've been doing to the Shermans. Today, we teach them different. Today, we show them that American tank destroyers can kill at ranges they didn't know were possible. He looked around at the faces of his men, seeing the mixture of nervousness and determination. I know what you've heard. I know the stories about the Panthers scare the hell out of you. They should. It's a damn good tank. But we have 3 advantages they don't expect. First, we're faster than anything they can field. Second, we have better optics and training for long-range engagement. Third, and most important, they don't know we're here. They're expecting Shermans to come rolling down those roads like ducks in a shooting gallery. Instead, they're going to get Hellcats hitting them from positions they didn't know we could reach. The briefing continued for another 20 minutes, assigning sectors, establishing radio protocols, and coordinating with the infantry and artillery units that would support them. By 0600 hours, the Hellcats were moving out in dispersed formation, heading for their assigned positions in the hills overlooking the planned German avenue of advance. Conroy's crew moved their M18 onto a slight rise behind a tree line, carefully backing into position so only the gun and upper turret were visible from the valley below. Martinez immediately began ranging potential target areas, calling out distances and landmarks to the rest of the crew. Driver Private Joe Sullivan made minor adjustments to their position, ensuring they could pull back rapidly if needed. 2,200 yards to that destroyed farmhouse, Martinez reported. 2,400 to the crossroads. 2,100 to that church steeple. Conroy marked each reference point on his own map. The Germans would likely use those same landmarks for navigation, making them perfect aiming points. He pulled out his binoculars and began scanning the valley, looking for any signs of movement. Across the battalion's front, 17 other Hellcats were settling into similar positions. They'd spread out across 3 miles of ridgeline, each crew selecting positions that offered maximum visibility and multiple escape routes. This wasn't like traditional tank warfare, where armor grouped together for mutual support. Tank destroyer doctrine emphasized dispersion and independence. Each crew was an independent hunter, responsible for their own sector. The sun climbed higher, burning away the morning fog. The September day promised to be clear and warm, perfect weather for spotting targets at long range. Conroy's loader, Private Danny O'Brien from Boston, broke out ration tins and passed them around. They ate slowly, keeping their eyes on the valley, knowing the Germans could appear at any moment. At 0930 hours, the radio crackled to life. All Hellcat units, this is Hellcat 6. We have reports of enemy armor movement approximately 5 miles east of your positions. Multiple vehicles, moving west on the main highway, estimated arrival in your sectors within 30 minutes. Weapons free when you have positive identification and clear shots. Remember your training. Shoot and scoot. Make every shot count. The wait was over. Somewhere beyond the horizon, German tank commanders were buttoning up their Panthers and preparing for what they expected to be another easy victory against American armor. They had no idea that a new kind of predator was waiting for them in the hills. Conroy felt his heartbeat accelerate. His hands were steady, but he could feel the adrenaline singing in his blood. Around him, his crew made final preparations with the calm efficiency of endless training. Martinez adjusted his sight one last time. Sullivan checked his escape route again. O'Brien arranged the 76mm shells for easy access. The morning sun glinted off something metallic in the distance. Conroy raised his binoculars and felt his breath catch. Panthers, at least 6 of them, moving in staggered formation down the valley road, their long guns sweeping the terrain ahead. Behind them came Panzer V's and half-tracks loaded with infantry. It was a full Panzer battalion, moving with the arrogant confidence of soldiers who believed themselves invincible. Target Panthers dead ahead, Conroy said quietly into the radio. Range approximately 2,200 yards. Engaging on my command. All along the ridgeline, other Hellcat commanders were reporting similar sightings. The Germans had driven straight into the trap without knowing it existed. They were about to learn that the rules of armored warfare had changed, and the hard way. Conroy took a deep breath and gave the order that would begin the battle. Gunner Panther, 2,200 yards, fire when ready. Martinez settled behind his sight, making micro-adjustments for range, wind, and the slight uphill angle. His finger tightened on the trigger. The morning was about to get very loud and very deadly. The M18's 76mm gun roared, and 2,200 yards away, The lead Panther erupted in flames. Martinez had aimed for the junction where the turret met the hull, a weak point in the German tank's otherwise formidable armor. The armor-piercing round struck with devastating precision, penetrating the thinner side armor and detonating the ammunition stored inside. The explosion blew the turret completely off the chassis, sending it cartwheeling through the air like a child's toy. 45 tons of German engineering transformed into a burning coffin in less than 3 seconds. The German column stopped dead. Tank commanders popped their hatches, scanning desperately for the source of the attack. They saw nothing. The Hellcats were perfectly concealed in the tree line, their low profiles and careful positioning making them nearly invisible against the hillside. Target destroyed, Martinez reported, already traversing to acquire the next Panther. Engaging second target. Before the Germans could react, 17 more Hellcats opened fire across the 3-mile front. The valley exploded with violence. Another Panther took a round through its engine compartment and ground to a halt, black smoke pouring from its vents. A Panzer IV tried to reverse but caught a shell in its tracks, immobilizing it instantly. The German infantry scattered from their half-tracks, diving for whatever cover they could find. Major Hans Kruger, commanding the lead Panzer company, couldn't believe what he was seeing. His Panthers were being destroyed at ranges where American tanks shouldn't even be able to spot them, much less hit them. He grabbed his radio microphone, shouting orders to disperse and return fire. But return fire at what? His gunners couldn't identify targets through the smoke and morning haze. They fired blindly at the ridgeline, their shells falling short or screaming harmlessly over the concealed American positions. Conroy watched as Martinez fired again, this time targeting a Panther that had begun traversing its turret toward their position. The round punched through the glacis plate at the perfect angle, and the German tank shuddered to a stop, its crew bailing out through the hatches. 3 shots, 3 kills. The months of training were paying off in the most dramatic way possible. Relocate, relocate, Conroy ordered. Sullivan already had the engine running. The Hellcat backed rapidly from its position, swung around behind the ridgeline, and raced to a secondary firing position 400 yards south. The entire maneuver took less than 90 seconds. By the time German gunners had finally ranged their original position and sent shells crashing into the trees, the M18 was gone, settling into a new hide with fresh fields of fire. This was the essence of tank destroyer doctrine: shoot and scoot. Never stay in one place long enough for the enemy to fix your position. Hit hard, move fast, and never give them a chance to hit back. The Germans, trained for set-piece battles where armor traded blows until one side broke, had no answer for these phantom killers. Major Kruger's radio exploded with panicked reports. 8 Panthers destroyed or disabled in the first 5 minutes of contact. Panzer IVs burning across the valley floor. Infantry pinned down by American machine gun fire from the ridges. His carefully planned advance had turned into a slaughter, and he still couldn't see what was killing his tanks. He ordered smoke shells fired to obscure the battlefield, hoping to buy time to withdraw. White phosphorus bloomed across the valley, creating an artificial fog bank. But the American gunners had already ranged every key position. They continued firing through the smoke, guided by their meticulously prepared range cards and the occasional glimpse of German vehicles trying to maneuver. Lieutenant Werner Schmidt sat frozen in his Panther, watching shells bracket his position. He'd fought in Russia, survived Kursk, and thought he'd seen everything armored warfare could throw at him. But this was different. This was being hunted by an invisible predator that struck from impossible distances. His gunner, a veteran who'd knocked out dozens of Soviet tanks, couldn't acquire a single target. They were firing at muzzle flashes and guesses, wasting ammunition while American rounds walked steadily closer. A shell screamed past Schmidt's tank, missing by meters. The next one wouldn't miss. He knew it with absolute certainty. "Driver, reverse full speed," he ordered. "We're pulling back." His Panther lurched backward, engine roaring. Around him, other German tanks were doing the same, abandoning any pretense of attack. This wasn't a fighting retreat. It was a rout. The most feared tanks in the Wehrmacht were fleeing from an enemy they couldn't even see. Conroy watched the Germans withdraw through his binoculars, counting the burning vehicles left behind. 11 Panthers destroyed or abandoned, 7 Panzer IVs knocked out. Multiple half-tracks and trucks scattered across the valley like discarded toys. The entire engagement had lasted less than 20 minutes, and his battalion had suffered exactly 0 casualties. "Cease fire! Cease fire!" Lieutenant Colonel Abrams ordered over the radio. "Let them run. Conserve ammunition and prepare for follow-up operations. All units report status." The radio net crackled with reports. Charlie Company reported 5 confirmed kills. No damage. Baker Company claimed 7. 1 vehicle with a thrown track but repairable. Alpha Company had engaged a separate German column on the northern flank, destroying 4 Panthers and a self-propelled gun. Across the entire battalion, they'd knocked out more than 20 German armored vehicles without losing a single Hellcat. The mathematics of armored warfare had inverted in a single morning. Instead of 5 Shermans to kill 1 Panther, it was now 1 Hellcat for every 3 or 4 German tanks. The Americans had found the formula, and it was devastatingly simple. Superior speed, superior positioning, superior optics, and crews trained to exploit all 3 advantages. At German headquarters 15 miles to the east, the reports coming in bordered on the incomprehensible. General Hasso von Manteuffel read the casualty lists with growing disbelief. An entire panzer battalion mauled by an enemy they never even saw clearly. Tank commanders reporting American guns firing accurately from beyond 2,000 meters. Panthers, the pride of German armored engineering, destroyed before they could bring their own superior weapons to bear. Von Manteuffel summoned his staff officers. What exactly did they encounter out there? What kind of weapons can engage Panthers at these ranges? Nobody had answers. Intelligence on American tank destroyers was limited. They knew about the M10 Wolverine, which had proven capable but not exceptional. But this was something different, something faster, more lethal, and employed with tactics that caught German doctrine completely off guard. "Find out what they're using," von Manteuffel ordered, "and find out how to stop it. If we can't move our armor without being destroyed at extreme range, we can't defend France, much less Germany itself." But stopping the Hellcats would prove far more difficult than anyone in the German high command could have imagined. The Americans had spent years developing a doctrine specifically designed to defeat superior enemy tanks, and at Aracourt, that doctrine had proven itself with brutal efficiency. As darkness fell on September 12th, the crews of the 704th Tank Destroyer Battalion performed maintenance on their vehicles, restocked ammunition, and tried to process what they'd accomplished. They'd faced the tanks that had terrorized Allied armor for months and made them look obsolete. The Panthers were still dangerous, still deadly if they caught you at close range. But at distance, with proper positioning and trained crews, the Hellcats owned the battlefield. Sergeant Conroy sat on his M18's hull, eating cold rations and watching the last light fade from the sky. Somewhere to the east, German tank commanders were doing the same thing, but their thoughts were very different. For the first time since the Panther had entered service, German crews were the ones feeling outmatched and afraid. The Battle of Aracourt wasn't over. It would rage for another week, with more German counterattacks and more American defensive victories. But the precedent had been set. American tank destroyers could defeat German Panthers, and they could do it decisively. The news spread through the Allied armies like wildfire. American tank destroyers had shattered a German Panzer counterattack, destroying over 40 enemy vehicles in a single week while suffering minimal losses. Suddenly, the Hellcat crews were celebrities, and their tactics became required study material for every armored unit in Europe. But the Germans were adapting. They always adapted. By late September 1944, German tactical manuals were being hastily rewritten. New orders emphasized caution when approaching high ground, extensive reconnaissance before any advance, and immediate smoke deployment when taking long-range fire. Panzer commanders who'd grown accustomed to aggressive advances now moved with calculated paranoia, assuming every ridgeline hid American guns. The psychological impact ran even deeper than the tactical adjustments. Lieutenant Werner Schmidt, who'd survived the initial Aracourt engagement, found himself hesitating before every operation. The confidence that had carried him through 2 years of combat in Russia had evaporated. He knew intellectually that his Panther remained a formidable weapon, but he also knew that somewhere beyond visual range, an American gunner might already have him in their sights. His crew felt it too. His driver flinched at distant sounds. His gunner jumped at shadows. They'd seen too many Panthers burning, their crews trapped inside when ammunition cooked off. The invincibility they'd once felt had been stripped away by an enemy that struck from distances they'd believed were safe. The Americans pressed their advantage. Tank destroyer battalions began operating with increased aggression, sometimes pushing forward of the main infantry lines to establish blocking positions. Their speed allowed them to reach critical terrain before German forces could secure it, and once in position, their long-range firepower made them nearly impossible to dislodge without suffering prohibitive casualties. In early October, near the town of Moyenvik, the 704th Tank Destroyer Battalion demonstrated the full potential of their tactics. German forces attempted a night infiltration, hoping darkness would negate American range advantages. Instead, they drove straight into a carefully prepared kill zone. Staff Sergeant Conroy's crew had positioned their Hellcat at a road junction, with clear sight lines down 3 different approaches. They'd spent the afternoon preparing range cards and pre-positioning aiming stakes that would be visible even in darkness. When German vehicles appeared, silhouetted against the lighter horizon, Martinez needed only seconds to acquire and engage each target. The battle lasted 4 hours. Wave after wave of German armor tried to break through, but the concentrated fire from multiple Hellcat positions turned each attempt into a funeral procession. By dawn, 19 German vehicles lay wrecked along the roads, and the attack had completely stalled. The 704th reported 3 wounded and 1 vehicle damaged by artillery fire. These lopsided victories had consequences beyond simple casualty statistics. German offensive operations ground to a halt across entire sectors as commanders refused to commit armor without overwhelming superiority in numbers. The initiative shifted decisively to American forces, who could now maneuver with confidence knowing their tank destroyer battalions could handle any German armored threat. Major Hans Kruger, now commanding what remained of his Panzer Battalion after Aricourt, sat in a farmhouse headquarters studying after-action reports. The numbers told a story of systematic destruction. His battalion had started September with 42 operational Panthers. 3 weeks later, they had 19, and most of those were due to mechanical breakdown rather than battlefield losses. The American tank destroyers had accounted for 17 confirmed kills. What haunted him most was the efficiency of it. In Russia, tank battles had been chaotic, close-range brawls where both sides took terrible casualties. But against the Hellcats, his Panthers were being picked off with surgical precision from ranges where they couldn't effectively respond. German doctrine had no answer for an enemy that refused to close to fighting distance. He drafted a report to division headquarters, carefully wording his conclusions. The American M18 tank destroyer represents a fundamental challenge to our operational methods. Its combination of speed, firepower, and tactical employment negates our armor superiority. Recommend avoiding engagement unless we can force close-range combat or achieve significant numerical superiority. Further recommend extensive use of infantry screens and artillery suppression before committing armor to any advance. The report was filed alongside hundreds of similar assessments flooding up the German chain of command. Collectively, they painted a picture of an American weapons system that had achieved strategic impact far beyond its relatively small numbers. The Wehrmacht had excellent tanks, well-trained crews, and decades of tactical experience. But none of it mattered if they couldn't bring their weapons to bear before being destroyed. By November, the pattern had repeated itself across the Western Front. Near Metz, M18s engaged German armor across the Moselle River, using their range advantage to support river-crossing operations. In the Vosges Mountains, they ambushed panzer columns attempting to reinforce threatened sectors. Every engagement followed the same script. American tank destroyers firing from concealed positions at extreme range, German forces taking heavy losses while struggling to locate their tormentors, and eventual German withdrawal after suffering unacceptable casualties. The kill ratios told the story. Tank destroyer battalions averaged between 3 and 5 German vehicles destroyed for every American vehicle lost. Some elite battalions, like the 704th, achieved ratios as high as 10 to 1. These numbers represented a revolution in cost effectiveness. The M18 cost roughly $60,000 to produce, compared to $100,000 for a Sherman and exponentially more for a Panther. Yet in combat, The cheaper, lighter American vehicle was consistently defeating its more expensive German counterpart. Captain Robert Hayes, who'd written home in July about fighting with pea shooters, sent another letter in November. "We finally have weapons that give us better than an even chance. The Hellcats are performing miracles out here. The Germans are terrified of them, and with good reason. Our boys are confident again, taking the fight to the enemy instead of dreading every engagement. This is how wars are won, not just with superior numbers, but with superior thinking." The tactical evolution continued on both sides. Germans began using smokescreens extensively, trying to close the range before Hellcats could engage effectively. Americans countered by positioning multiple vehicles to cover different approach routes, ensuring someone always had clear sight lines. Germans tried concentrating armor for breakthrough attempts, accepting heavy initial casualties to overwhelm defensive positions. Americans responded by reinforcing successful sectors and using their speed to redeploy quickly when threatened. But the fundamental calculus remained unchanged. The Hellcats' combination of speed, firepower, and doctrine gave American forces a decisive advantage in armored engagements. German Panthers remained individually superior in armor protection and gun performance. But warfare isn't conducted by individual vehicles in isolation. It's conducted by units employing doctrine, and American doctrine had proven superior. Lieutenant Werner Schmidt survived until December, when his Panther finally fell victim to an M18 firing from a churchyard 2,000 meters away. He and most of his crew escaped, but the tank that had carried him through Russia and France burned like all the others. Sitting in a field hospital, he reflected on how completely the war had changed. A year earlier, his Panther had been a symbol of German superiority. Now it was just another target for American gunners who'd mastered the art of long-range killing. The lessons of Aracourt and the subsequent battles rippled through military establishments worldwide. The age of heavily armored tanks engaging in close-range slugging matches was giving way to a new era emphasizing speed, firepower, and tactical positioning. The Americans had glimpsed the future of armored warfare, and it looked like an M18 Hellcat firing from 2,000 yards. The winter of 1944 brought Germany's final desperate gamble in the West. Operation Watch on the Rhine, better known as the Battle of the Bulge, launched on December 16th with overwhelming force through the Ardennes forest. Hitler committed his last strategic reserves, including elite SS Panzer divisions equipped with the newest Panthers and even heavier King Tigers, betting everything on splitting the Allied armies and capturing the vital port of Antwerp. The initial German breakthrough caught American forces off guard, creating chaos across a 50-mile front. But among the units that responded immediately were the tank destroyer battalions, including veterans of Aracourt. They raced through snow-covered roads toward the sound of fighting, knowing that German armor breakthrough could turn into catastrophe if not stopped quickly. Staff Sergeant Thomas Conroy's Hellcat crew arrived at the crossroads town of Bastogne on December 19th, part of a hastily assembled defensive force. The town sat at the junction of 7 roads, making it critical terrain that neither side could afford to lose. German forces surrounded it within days, but the defenders held, and the tank destroyers played a crucial role in breaking every armored assault. The fighting around Bastogne differed dramatically from the open valleys of Aracourt. Here, visibility was measured in hundreds of yards rather than thousands, with fog, snow, and dense forests limiting engagement ranges. The Hellcats couldn't exploit their long-range advantage as effectively, but they adapted. Their speed allowed them to respond rapidly to German probes, racing from one threatened sector to another, arriving just in time to blunt attacks before they could penetrate the perimeter. On Christmas Eve, German panzer forces made their strongest push yet. A Kampfgruppe built around a dozen Panthers, and supporting infantry attacked from the northwest, hoping to overwhelm the defenders through sheer weight of assault. Conroy's crew, positioned near a destroyed church, engaged the lead vehicles at 600 yards, far closer than they preferred but still outside the effective range of German return fire in the swirling snow. Martinez worked his gun with the precision of a surgeon, putting rounds into vulnerable points with mechanical efficiency. Track assemblies, engine compartments, turret rings, anywhere the armor was thinner or joints created weak spots. The Germans pushed forward with suicidal determination, closing the range, trading casualties for ground. But the Hellcats held, and when the attack finally broke, 8 Panthers lay immobilized or burning in the snow. The siege of Bastogne ended on December 26th when Patton's Third Army broke through from the south. But the battle for the Bulge continued into January, and tank destroyer battalions remained at the forefront of the fighting. Every German counterattack ran into prepared defensive positions where American guns waited at maximum effective range. The Panthers that had shocked the world in 1944 were being systematically destroyed by crews who'd mastered the art of precision gunnery under the worst possible conditions. By February 1945, the German offensive had completely collapsed. Hitler's gamble had failed, costing the Wehrmacht irreplaceable tanks, fuel, and veteran crews. The tank destroyer battalions had proven themselves not just in ideal conditions like Aricourt, but in close terrain, bad weather, and desperate circumstances. Their doctrine worked because it was fundamentally sound, built on speed, training, and intelligent employment rather than trying to match German engineering pound for pound. As Allied armies crossed into Germany itself, the Hellcats continued their work. Near Remagen, they provided fire support for the crucial bridge crossing. In the Ruhr pocket, they helped encircle and destroy an entire German army group. Racing across southern Germany, they engaged the last functional panzer units in running battles that demonstrated just how thoroughly American doctrine had evolved. Corporal Eddie Martinez fired his final shot of the war on May 7, 1945, destroying a Panther attempting to break through American lines near the Czech border. It was his 43rd confirmed kill, making him one of the most successful tank destroyer gunners in the European theater. When the gun fell silent and someone told him the war was over, he sat quietly for a long moment before carefully cleaning his weapon one last time. The statistics compiled after the war told a remarkable story. American tank destroyer battalions had knocked out over 8,000 German armored vehicles while suffering approximately 2,500 losses of their own, a kill ratio of better than 3-to-1. The M18 Hellcat specifically had proven to be the most cost-effective tank killer of the war, with some battalions achieving ratios as high as 20-to-1 in favorable circumstances. But numbers alone couldn't capture the psychological impact. German tank crews who'd survived the Eastern Front spoke of American tank destroyers with genuine fear. Panzer commanders who'd once attacked with confidence now approached every engagement expecting to be engaged from ranges they couldn't counter. The myth of German armored invincibility, built through years of victories across Europe, had been shattered by American doctrine and crews willing to master it. In the decades following the war, military analysts studied the Hellcats' success extensively. The conclusions reinforced principles that would shape armored warfare for generations. Heavy armor wasn't always the answer. Mobility and firepower, properly employed, could defeat heavier opponents. Crew training mattered more than vehicle specifications. Doctrine that matched your equipment's strengths to enemy weaknesses could overcome apparent technological disadvantages. The Panther remained, on paper, a superior tank to the M18. Thicker armor, more powerful gun, better crew protection. But warfare isn't conducted on paper. It's conducted by exhausted crews making split-second decisions in terrible conditions, by officers choosing where and when to commit their forces, by doctrine that either exploits advantages or wastes them. The Americans had built a system that worked, and they'd proven it from France to Germany. Staff Sergeant Thomas Conroy returned home to Pennsylvania in August 1945. His Hellcat crew intact, despite 11 months of nearly continuous combat. They'd survived because they'd been smarter, faster, and better trained than their opponents. The letters he'd written home evolved from terror in July 1944 to confidence by war's end. That transformation, repeated across thousands of tank destroyer crewmen, represented America's learning curve in armored warfare compressed into a single year. He kept a photograph from Aricourt, taken the morning after that first devastating ambush. His M18 sat in perfect hull-down position, its long gun trained down the valley where German Panthers had burned. Looking at that image years later, he could still remember the moment when he'd realized they could win, not through brute force or superior numbers, but through speed, precision, and the courage to engage the enemy's best weapons on American terms. The Germans had shocked the world with the Panther in 1943, creating a tank that seemed unbeatable. But by late 1944, it was the Germans who were shocked, discovering that American tank destroyers could kill Panthers from 2,000 yards with consistent accuracy. The hunters had become the hunted, and the lessons learned in the valleys of France and the forests of Germany would echo through military doctrine for decades to come. The M18 Hellcat's combat career ended with victory in Europe, but its legacy endured. It had proven that in armored warfare, as in so much else, success belonged not to whoever built the biggest weapon, but to whoever best understood how to use what they had. The young Americans who'd crewed those fast, lightly armored tank destroyers had written a new chapter in military history, one that emphasized brains over brawn, doctrine over steel, and training over raw power. They'd faced the best tanks Germany could produce and made them obsolete, not through superior engineering, but through superior thinking. That was the real shock delivered at places like Aracourt, and it was a lesson the world would not forget.